Hello, hello, and welcome to another instalment of the Parenting from the Heart podcast. Today, we are talking to the lovely Joanne Roach from the Foodies. Hi, Joanne. It's really great. So this is we're doing a YouTube video, and this is also going to be the podcast at the same time, because some people like to watch interviews and some people like to listen to them. So we thought we'd do both, which is brilliant. And the reason why I've invited Joanne on, I'm going to ask her to tell us all a little bit more about what she does, but it's because one of the most common things that I get asked, because I do conscious parenting and supporting parents with their healing and their skills to become the best parents that they can be, people ask practical skills. So we do talk about a lot of healing, and we talk about things like hypnotherapy and how to move forward on our own personal journey. And it comes hand in hand with, how do I get my kids to put their shoes on? How do I make sure we're on time? How do I raise a respectful, polite child who also knows their worth and won't be bullied or put down? And all of this is part of the skills area. And one really, really common thing that people ask, especially when they find out that our family is vegan, is, how do I get my kids to eat vegetables? It's just, I think it's perennial because it's been around forever. And I remember my mum, so I'm the baby of 5, and there are 3 boys in between me and my sister, who was the eldest. I remember us having it too. It's just, or one of them who would have them, but only if they were so covered in tomato ketchup that you couldn't see them. And this is really, really common. And then I met Joanne, and I thought, brilliant. We could join forces, and actually, hopefully, this will be very useful for for the listeners, the conscious parents. So, Joanne, can you tell us a little bit about first, what is the Foodies, and then give us some ideas for how to get our children to eat vegetables?
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in a very similar household. We kind of, got what we were given. But I can remember that every time anybody said, "Oh, this is tangy," that meant I'm not going to eat it. Like, tangy became our word.
The code.
It's a bit tangy. And Mum would
We
go,
had spicy.
Oh. Yeah,
My
there
kids are
you
like,
go.
it's very, very spicy. It's parsnip. Spicy.
It's still spicy. So I run the Foodies, which is basically about getting kids to love their fruit and veg. So definitely the right person for this conversation. I use Familiarity basically to encourage children to like their fruit and veg. So the world of food is like, there's so much information now. We're in kind of a minefield. We've never had so much food, but a lot of it isn't necessarily what you'd want to be eating all of the time. There's so much messaging about it. There's a lot of guilt about it. Like, parenting's hard enough as it is, and food is hard enough as it is. You put the two together, it's like a recipe for like guilt and distress and anxiety. And
it is interesting. I am doing another podcast with somebody in a couple of weeks, and it's for mums, my mums and dads, but mostly mums, and our own body issues and our issues about guilt with food, and a lot of people, because I work with cycle breaker parents, so this is the parents who have had traumatic or chaotic or distressing, confusing upbringings, and they then want to break the cycle for their children. And then when you start looking into cycle breaking, people are like, I had a really terrible relationship with food as a kid. I had to finish my plate, otherwise I was in trouble. Or even societal norms. I have 2 sons and a daughter, and I do feel this a bit with both of them, but especially my daughter. I just look at the magazines and I think, I don't want her to be like, I think me and you are probably about a similar age. I don't want her to take all of these airbrushed images on and want to be skinnier. And how do we do it? And food is really the start, the food and the self-esteem, isn't it?
It is definitely. And so like, we've got all of our own issues about food and our own bodies and what we eat, and then we have these ideas of what we think we should be doing for our children, and some of those
everybody else has ideas.
It's like, how am I eating in front of my children? How am I encouraging my children to eat? How do we eat when we go out? And it's just such a massive minefield. And like, I'm not a dietitian or a nutritionist, so like, I don't get into the whys and wherefores of different value systems around it. But the one thing that everybody agrees with, like, no matter what kind of dietary framework you have, that everybody can afford to eat more fruit and veg. Like, if we eat lots of fruit and veg, like, any diet becomes healthier if you add in fruit and veg. So, and it is one of the biggest problems for parents, is getting children, and schools, getting children to like their fruit and veg. So there's quite a lot of studies about the fact that if children are more familiar with food, they're more likely to eat it. So they've done some reasonably good large-scale studies, and small-scale ones in like day nursery settings or with a group of families that visit a family centre, that kind of thing, where they use different ways to build children's familiarity and then track how the children then absorb food later on. So things like there was experiments where they'd have one group of children would have an adult demonstrating some food in front of them, chopping some off and cooking it and so on, but the children didn't get to touch it. Or there was another one where the children got to interact with it and chop it up and do all of those things. And the ones that had been able to interact with the food themselves, then over the following weeks, ate those foods that they'd seen and interacted with more than the other group.
You know what? I've seen that in our house. We bought one of those. It's like a cheese grater. We don't have cheese, but it's one where you put it in, and then so the kids aren't getting their fingers anywhere near it, but you turn it like that, so it's safe. So I would chop them up, or like my eldest would chop them up, and we put, say, a carrot in there, and then they turn it. And I mean, like kids, I mean, seriously, my kids were having a fight over who got the most grated carrot. And my husband and I were like, what? It's just because they'd done it, so they wanted to eat it.
And it's play, and like children, you know, they want to play. We all want to play. We just forget as we get older, but they still want to play. So if we can let children play with food, I mean, there's even been studies where they used pictures, like they literally showed kids pictures of vegetables, and the ones that had pictures or books read to them about vegetables ate more vegetables over time. This is like an overtime thing, not like, you know, here's a picture of a cabbage, now eat the cabbage, but just over time. So so I'm all about, this is a very simple way that everybody can start where their kids are at, start where they're at, what time they've got and their life circumstances, and they can do a little bit of building up familiarity. So the things that I do, I make books set in a veggie patch that are all, you know, different stories for each month of the year, and all the characters are in season.
Would you mind sharing as well? I know the people on the podcast won't get it, but the people watching the YouTube video, like, can see it. It's cool. So brilliant.
So we're currently in July. So our food of the month is tomato, and they're just little normal stories. You know, you can see there, they're just little stories for young children that a child can either read themselves if they're an early reader, or they're made to be nice to read aloud for an adult to read to the child. And they're just little stories set in a veggie patch, normal little adventures. But they are fairly accurate, so they're like seasonally correct, and you know, that we don't have cutesy names. They're just this is what fruit and vegetables look like in their setting. And then I do a subscription box, which is loads of activities and so on, and I have a load of free stuff on my website. So like, I'm not here to sell all my stuff. There's loads of free stuff on my website.
And I should just say to everybody, we'll put the website in the show notes, so you can just click through from the podcast or in the YouTube, I don't know what they're called, but the notes, so it's all accessible. I am definitely going to go on there, because this is exactly the sort of thing that we would have had when we were in UK. We were just working out whether we could get it into Vietnam, but actually we can't, because it comes with seeds and they won't let it in.
But yeah, so that's what I base my stuff around. But my whole message is basically, wherever your child is at, just introduce foods to them at times that aren't the meal time. Now,
that's a really interesting point as well, because I think a lot of people are like, here's this thing, eat it. And I remember from being a child myself, like, it's different is scary, isn't it? And especially if it's something like a mushroom, because we're in a different country. We've been here in Vietnam for nearly a year. August will be our first anniversary of here, and there's like there's a lot of food that we're used to, and we used to eat quite a wide range of food, but then there's things like the mushrooms or the fungi has like caused us no end of wobbles here, because I don't know if there's like 1,000 different types of fungi, and there's like little ones with little caps, and there's like frilly ones. And for the first about 3 months, I mean, the first time one of them was put on my plate, I genuinely went, oh, because it was different.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
And it reminded me of, my kids were like, no. And now they're like, oh, can I have some in my pho? Like the traditional soup and things, which is incredible. But it's taken us months of seeing the same things again and again and again, and having like a tiny bit. Or can you put it, we used to have it, say, like they'd have their plate, but also the thing that was new, they served themselves. So, or sometimes even one of mine, he will have something like a mushroom. He has a thing with courgettes as well. Like he would put them on a separate plate. He will, and we sort of look at each other, my husband and I, and we're like, he's going to eat courgette, fine. I don't care. I'm not going to fight this battle, like, because it's not a battle. If you choose to eat your courgette in a different way to anybody I've ever seen, eat one.
Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, that is the thing, like you're saying, with, you know, it does make you realize when you go into a different setting, if you go to a dinner at somebody's house that you've never been to before, or you go to a new restaurant and there's something on it, if you go to a restaurant that's a different food culture and you don't understand the language, so you're having to ask the waiter, there is a moment of trepidation where it's like, what's in that, like, what does that ingredient mean? And like, we're adults and we're negotiating the world as an adult, but if we have that moment of trepidation, what must it be like for a child who has a much more limited sort of palette of information to be kind of like, well, what is this? And I'm being expected to eat it. You can build up ways of building their familiarity outside of the food. Now, like, obviously food costs money, so like, I'm not proposing that everybody goes out and buy, like, you know, £100 worth of vegetables and play with them every week. That's like not how I do it, and it's not feasible.
And that leads us on to the other thing that a lot of people say is, you know, we especially maybe in lockdown, or, you know, people will say, like, you know, I had a baby and then my toddler, you know, I had my toddler and I've been, you know, feeding them, but I just couldn't cook things from scratch. I was too tired. So we had a lot of things like chicken nuggets or, you know, pizza, like standard things. Or even after Christmas, I have this exact thing, because they get used to all these, you know, rich treat foods, and then end up in this position of saying, but they will only eat chicken nuggets now. And if I put anything that isn't chicken nuggets on the table, they refuse point blank to eat it. And I can't afford, I remember this from a Jamie Oliver thing as well, like, I can't afford to, time-wise or money-wise, to make something from scratch and to have a go, you know, like, oh, look at me, I'm trying, and then for my kid to turn it down. Like, I literally don't have enough money. And that was true before the pandemic, and it is most definitely true after people have been furloughed on 80% or lost their jobs. And
that's kind of going from, well, we can only eat chicken nuggets, to I have to have a gourmet meal cooked from scratch that, like, either people accept or reject. And there's so much of your own personal confidence in that, because you've made this thing with love, and then it's like they're rejecting your love if they reject your food, which is just an awful feeling. But
a granny once said to me, nobody gets emotionally attached to a fish finger. It was after I had genuinely burst into tears because the kids wouldn't eat something. I had 3 babies under 3.5, and it was that point where the oldest wasn't even 4, and she was like, just buy something in a box today. Just you have permission some days to not do it. And actually, you're right, it does feel like a real rejection when they won't eat something.
And the downside of being stressed about food is that it's 3 times a day plus snacks. So, like, you have 3 opportunities plus snacks, so 5 opportunities a day with young children to feel inadequate about yourself. But the flip side of that is that you've got 5 opportunities today to just, you know, have a tiny little success, or to improve on yesterday, or whatever. So, like, if you have a few days in a row where, like, everybody's feeling a bit grotty and there's a lot of food that isn't that great, doesn't matter. There'll be lots of other days. There's other days in the future. You know, by the time they leave your care, they'll have had thousands upon thousands of days filled with 5 times a day. So, like, this meal is not the beginning and the end of your life with food with your children. This one meal that's happening now shouldn't have all that weight and stress of perfection.
Sometimes it's that you said it, perfectionism. Like, we have this such a high bar, and society tells us that to be a good mom, you must get 5 fruit and veg in a day, and if you do not, you have therefore not been a good mom. And if your house isn't clean, you know, it's all that other stuff. If your house isn't clean and your laundry isn't folded, then you have failed. And that's you've not, like you said, it's opportunities. Like, you have 5 opportunities,
lots of opportunities
to offer them something.
So there's ways and means in between that, kind of like, will they accept my gourmet you know, monkfish with 3 side vegetables, or will they only eat a fish finger, which is pretty much the 2 ends. There's loads of other opportunities that you can either do, just putting a small amount on a plate, putting a small amount on the table, and so on. Like, keep presenting the foods. Whether you decide to try and ask them to taste a bite or not, it depends on your parenting style, but, like, still present it. Even if they're not going to eat it, still presenting it, even if it's only, you know, at 1 piece, or it's on your plate, or it's in the middle of the table and you take and they don't take. It just keeps turning up, so they keep seeing it, and thinking this is not a weird thing to eat because look, mum and dad are eating it all the time, or my sister's eating it all the time, so it's not weird. And then there's other opportunities. So for example, if a child really is you know, very anxious around food, then when you go to the supermarket, get them to find the fruits and vegetables. So like they don't have to promise to eat them, but they have to
have ownership
them. Yeah, if they can read, they can find the names and, you know, see the labels. If not, you can kind of say, well, you can describe it. It's green and it's round and it's got a hard skin and it's smaller than a potato or whatever it is, and get them to do that. So they start to build up the idea that like, oh, this label looks like this thing and it's a thing that we buy and we eat. So that's like a very good starting point. You can get them to like help chop up the food, even if they're not going to eat it, so that they get to explore the textures. They can talk about the textures and the smells. Describing things is a really good way to get away from like values, because like the values of like this is good or bad, yummy, yucky, I hate this, love this, are very kind of value, like they have a lot of weight for both the child and the parent. Whereas this is slimy, or this is scratchy, or this is salty, or this is tingly on my tongue, or this makes my nose wrinkle. Those are all ways of describing food, but they have no values, do they? Like the fact that something might be spicy could be good to one person or bad to another.
You know, that's really interesting, because this is one of the things that I teach about children's emotions. About it is what it is. You know, I'm feeling sad. Okay, what's that telling you? And we get it's the same thing, getting curious. What exactly does it look like? What does it, if I turn it, what does it look like on the underneath? You know, what if we cut it? What's it like inside? That's actually exactly what we do. So you can. I'm thinking, because obviously I work with mostly conscious parents, or you know, people who are aspiring to be conscious parents, and of course it's one of those things, anybody who actually directs their mental energy into it is by virtue a conscious parent. So there's no bar to strive for. It is you are who you are, and that's awesome. It's actually part of the same thing. So it's not like, oh, I have to learn this thing for food, oh, I have to learn this thing for emotions, oh, I have to learn this thing, tick 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 tick, which is why I would worry a bit about the, you know, like tick boxes. It's a general ethos within the home of, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like don't silo food into like there's like play and learning and entertainment and, you know, family time and all that, and then there's food. Like food can do all of those things. So like, you know, instead of like playing together and then you go and prepare the food just for like 2 minutes. I mean, having kids in the kitchen can be really stressful, so I'm not suggesting like always get your kids to cook with you, because like not everybody can do that.
Some days,
like I love cooking with my kids, but like, you know what, once a week, once a fortnight, that I actually have them in the kitchen when it's the main family meal, because you know I've got to get the food on the table by a certain time so we can get on with the rest of the evening.
And like mine are small, so you have things like the kettle and the knives and things, or some days we can be set up. And
I mean, mine is 17 and 19 now, so I've got the opposite end, which is that like my son cooks once a week, and some of the weeks he repeats a recipe, and some of the weeks it's a new recipe, and so I have to go in and teach him it. So like on those weeks, obviously I've got to have the time and the energy to kind of stand there and go, actually no, it's better if you do it this way or whatever. So like you just don't always have the bandwidth, and that's fine. But like, you know, you could get a child to just literally come and like grate a bit off the side of, just do one grating off the side of a carrot, and then talk about the gratings and smell the carrot and say some things about it and wander off. That's a 30-second thing, but they have then interacted with a carrot in a way, and they've talked about it, and they've like had that, they've like made friends with that carrot for that split moment again. And those little things just add up. It's also quite good if you show them before and after cooking, so they can kind of go, look at this, like look what this is like when it's raw, and then when we bring it to the table you can have a feel of it, and like you're not going to say they've got to try it, but you can say like, you know, squidge it now and see what it's like. Oh, it's hard, isn't it? Like when I get to the table, I'm going to give you a piece to squidge, and you can see what you think of it, and you can smell it then. And so it's kind of setting up for a repeat experience.
You actually just reminded me of a long forgotten memory that I'm pretty sure there was. I'm going to ask my mum about this. I think there was years of my life where I wouldn't eat carrots unless they were raw. In fact, I remember it. I remember her like cooking, like cutting them and putting them in a pan and then leaving some for me, and I would only eat them raw, because it wasn't anything about with the actual carrots. It was how they felt, and so often it's not really necessarily about the taste, it was how they felt when they were cooked. And bless her, she didn't half overcook.
But
Yeah,
But no, texture is massive. Texture is really massive for children. And we've got to remember that some of this is like built into our evolution, that like the
like the
vast majority of
sliminess.
children will go through a picky phase, even if they're not picky their whole life. Most children will still go through a picky phase, usually around sort of 2 to 3-ish, up to like 7, 8-ish. That's like the sort of the peak, where before and after that they may or may not be anxious around
That's the
food,
age
but
of
they
all of my
probably all
children.
will be then. Yeah. And it's because, you know, that's the point at which they would be crawling about, getting out on their own 2 feet. And so evolutionarily, they think, we're not sure, but we think it's because it stopped them then picking up poisonous things and eating them when they were independent. So they don't, I think it's called neophobia, I think, the fear of new things. So they like don't go for new things without checking it. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it is. But yeah, so like that's like a normal thing. And like, instead of kind of making that,
well, it's
like,
good
no,
to know
I'm a
as well. That is
vegetarian.
so good to know, because now this is a completely different podcast. The whole thing of like, are we supposed to live in these, you know, nuclear families in our homes and not interact? I would argue probably not, but that's just how we live right now. But it's so easy to feel like I am the only person who finds this hard. And then if say you go to baby group or school, or, you know, meeting people, whatever age your kids are, you know, whether they're babies or teenagers or anywhere in between, we don't offer, you know, you don't see people go, oh, hi, how are you doing? You're like, oh, they won't eat, it's so stressful. You know, people sort of put that Instagram-y spin on it, unless you've got really, you know, you're with really close friends and then they just share everything. But it's that it can make you feel like there's only my kid who won't eat. And actually it's, like you said, it is phase, it is all kids.
Well, I can tell you, I spent
yours,
6 of the last 10 years working in school food, and I can tell you that there are definitely more kids that have some element of pickiness about a certain amount of food. Like, you know, not that all kids are picky about everything, but there are more kids in primary schools who have things they don't like and don't really want to eat than there are kids that will just eat everything in front of them. Like, I can just tell you that categorically. There are ones that will eat everything.
Really good to know.
There are ones that won't eat anything at all and have to have a very special packed lunch setting that is this very rigid thing. And then everybody else is in between, and the majority of people are somewhere in the middle. So it's just like
even grown-ups are like that. I have things that I just won't eat right now because I don't like them. I don't like Brussels sprouts, and actually that's fine. It doesn't define my value as a human being. I just don't like them. I try them every year at Christmas. Still don't like them.
I do think possibly at this point we can't be friends, but hey, right? So
I really like how they look, because they would look like jingle bells, you know. But I just every year. Maybe I need to put more butter on them or something.
But yeah, that's the thing. As adults, we choose our own food, and then we go to restaurants and we choose our own food. And the only time we ever get stuck with somebody else's food really is if we go to somebody's house for dinner, and then we have to decide whether or not to like eat something we don't like, or, you know, be impolite and not pick that thing up. But like most of our life, we have a lot of control, and children don't. So there's basically it like find lots of opportunities for them to just interact with food where they're not being expected to eat it. As many times as you can. If you then do want to do tasting with your children and you want to build it up, start where they're at. So if they won't eat the stuff, then get them to smell it. If they will smell the stuff, then maybe the next one is to touch it on their lip, or to touch it with their tongue and see what the tongue feel is like. They can touch it with their hands. They can try a tiny bit. If the child is really anxious around food, always have a napkin, and it'd be perfectly okay to put it in their mouth, chew it a couple of times, spit it back out again. Like, don't have an expectation that they'll swallow it, because that's a real barrier for a lot of children.
I wonder how many people listening to this were never given that option as kids.
Oh, well, I wasn't.
Like, you eat it, it's on your plate, you eat it. There are starving children in other countries eat it, and actually that just makes it makes it worse, because then it's a whole nother level of stress. And sometimes we have, you know, you said like the, you know, there's thousands upon thousands of meals over the time that your child is with you until they grow up. So you know, if they won't eat that, you know, parsnip or whatever it is that particular day, and they need to chew it twice and spit it out, but if they do that enough times, then one day they'll swallow it, and then, you know, in 3 years time they'll be asking you how you roast one when it's their turn to cook dinner.
Exactly. And there's also loads of various studies on that. It is a long game. There's loads of studies on like how many times a child has to try a food, or an adult for that matter, try a food before they will accept it. And it's anything from like 5 to 25 times.
That's a lot of failures, but they're not really failures, are they? It's a lot of attempts at getting used to it.
That's just to accept the food. That's not necessarily to like the food. That's just to get past all of the feelings about it. For some children, it takes lots of trying of a food to get past the feelings and to actually be able to really think, do I like the taste of this, without any of the anxiety about it or the newness of it or any of that. It might take them that many times to even know. And then also people's taste buds change. So a child might like a food. One of my children really hated tomatoes, as in that he would eat them, but he really hated them. And then about 3 years later, like kept having them. They just kept turning up his plate every, few weeks or so, and he kept eating them. And then now, like, it's his favorite food. And he always said, like, if I'd not carried on just putting them in front of him, like, without any judgment, well, sometimes they probably watch judgment. Someone's like, oh, put you that tomato, will you just not give it a bite? No, I don't like it. Well, I'll just have a bite.
Human, okay. Yeah.
I probably did do some of that. But yeah, like he wouldn't have those things in his life now.
Yeah, and also he'd have a mindset of like, I don't like these, and then that might hold him back. And I mean, I know it's a tomato, but in the grander scheme of if we don't keep giving our child, I know I'm veering into the sort of behavior and mindset of how they feel about themselves. So like if we always say like you're the stubborn one, then they develop a sense of their self, which is I am stubborn, or they fight us on it. Yeah. And neither of those is useful.
The words yet and so far are quite good. So like if your child says, I don't really like carrots, and you're like, yeah, you don't like carrots yet, do you? Or you haven't liked them so far. Yeah, but we've only tried them a few times, like that's quite good, because it gives them possibilities. It isn't a defining part of their character. It's just that so far when they've tried a carrot, they haven't liked it. So they don't like them yet.
And that's a casual conversation as well. It's not like you must eat this. It's just like, oh yeah, I see that. Yeah. Oh, I'm curious. I'm interested.
But I've got an adult friend who grew up in a household where food was quite restrictive, and when she got married, her husband was very adventurous about food. And what he said to her was, think of the thing that you like the most, like think of the meal you like, your very favorite thing. And she thought about what it was, and he said, what if this thing that you're don't want to eat, what if that's as good as that or better? And she was like, okay. And she started trying things, and now she'll eat anything. But that was that kind of like, well, what if this thing that you won't accept is better than
that's like green eggs and ham, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But all the way through he's like, I don't like it, and then was it like the last page he's like, oh gosh, if it will shut you up, I'll eat it. And not that that's what we want them to get to, but and then he's like, oh, I do like it. And sometimes my kids actually quote that book. So things like your books are so useful, because it does make them go like, oh, actually I know tomato, like I'm familiar with what a tomato is, so I might eat it. Whereas if it's this new alien thing plopped on their plate, it's like, I don't know.
So I think just in general, I've said a load of things now.
Yeah, they're great.
Somebody could be sitting there kind of but somebody could be sitting there going like, oh my god, I've got to do all of these things. And like, you don't. Just start where you're at and just try some things, try one thing. And if you think about it in these terms, if you just experimented with food a little bit, and your child ended up accepting, not necessarily loving, but accepting and like tolerated eating a bite of one food a month, just one food a month.
Actually, that's so doable. That's not scary. And that's not a complete waste of money, like one carrot a month, or like one bag of carrots a month. We can do that, or one broccoli or one cauliflower. Like that's not going to break the bank. And if they don't like it, then it's not upset. Like, we don't need to be upset about it, because we bought it knowing that it probably would be rejected first, and then less and less and less so, and then eventually accepted.
But that'd be 12 foods a year. So like if you start at 1, by the time they get to school, that's going to be 48 food by the time they get to school that they've tried. And if they like half of them, that's 24 fruit and veg that they would like by the time they started school. And if you're already like a 5-year-old, if you carry on with that till they're 11, even if they reject 3/4 of them, you're still going to have like a battery of 20 to 30 foods that they can go to other people's houses and eat. They can eat in their school dinners and so on. So just these little bits. Basically what I want to say is like, have hope that small steps add up over time. You're going to have these kids in your households for like the best part of 20 years. And during that time, you've got lots of opportunities to very gently just put these things in their life and have them accept them or not. And so like this meal that you're cooking today and you're worrying about today is not your whole parenting around food. It's just this evening's meal. and there's plenty of other chances to not get it right or get it wrong, because there isn't a right or wrong, but to present your child with a chance to be adventurous, another chance. There'll be loads, there'll be hundreds, thousands of them before they leave your house. So like, don't make it all about, you know,
like I feel like, you know, even me with the kids who are actually, they are fairly adventurous, and I guess that's because we've done things like world schooling and going to different places, although it's not like it's all been plain sailing, because it's absolutely not. But it makes it I feel like there's a lot less pressure. Like it is what it is, and if they eat it, they eat it, and if they don't, they don't, because we're on a sliding scale of maybe it takes another 10 goes, and that's fine. And that's a very different very different outlook to what many of us were raised with, you know, in that standard 80s, 90s, well, so, you know, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, like eat it else. That's very, very different. So for some of us, it actually might be quite healing to look after our, you know, to nurture our children's sense of and love of foods when we didn't have that. And actually, that's quite.
I mean, it's a choice they're going to make themselves when they leave our homes. It's a choice they're going to make for themselves 3 times a day plus snacks for the rest of their life. So them having the idea that they're allowed to like explore food and make choices that are based on what they want around food, and to take in expert advice. It's not that you shouldn't listen to advice about what's good for you and what's bad for you, and so it's not that you should, like, you know, entirely work with what's in your head. Like, outside advice is a good idea, but at the end of the day, what they choose to eat is their choice for the rest of their life, and what we're doing is helping them to learn how to make those choices.
Yeah, it's the foundation, isn't it?
It is a foundation. So I hope that message of like, it's okay, you've got lots of chances, and just do a little bit. If you have got children like yours that are a little bit more adventurous now, and you've got over the hump of, you know, it being difficult, what you can also do is you can still do tasting, but you can do it with blindfolds. That's a really cool thing to do. So in the subscription box that we do, we have 5 seasonal foods each month for them to try, and all the instructions are in there, from like, if they won't try foods, then just buy these at the supermarket or chop them up or smell them. There's like different layers. And the top layer is, if they're a child that will eat all 5 of those foods, and you know that they will, then you do a blindfold tasting. You don't tell them which one they're eating, and they have to guess just by their taste and smell which one they're eating, and it's like a game then.
That's funny. So in my head, I already know that 2 of them are going to be like, yes, bring it, and the other one, I already know which one it is. He's going to be like, nope, nope. But which is good, because it just shows that all kids are different, doesn't it?
Yes, and they can. That child can do the lower down levels. They can do the, well, I'll touch it or I'll smell it or whatever, and everybody gets to win.
Yes, wonderful. So I know we're going to put everything in the show notes, but you were going to share about, because you've got a podcast coming out very, very soon, haven't you? Which I think for anybody who's listening to this, and like, food is a thing in your house, and that's totally cool if it is, because we all have our own flashpoints, don't we, for all different kinds of reasons, which is why I don't know if you know, I did a podcast the other day about, you know, when a pet passes away and how you support your children. That's not going to be relevant to everybody, or, you know, maybe it will be one day, but not right now. And so I do think the food, we all eat food, so that is relevant. But, you know, some people might be thinking, I want to follow this up, I want to learn more. Joanne's amazing. Well, I'm thinking that already. So where can people find you?
Thank you. Well, the foodies.org is my main website. And then I'm on everywhere as the Foodies books, because my core product is the books. So the Foodies books on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, everywhere as the Foodies books. And then I am starting a podcast. It's looking like mid to late August, just in time for going back to school. And it's a short, school run friendly podcast, and it's like magazine segments. So it's not a half-hour interview. It's like 5 minutes of one topic and 5 minutes another topic. And it will be a mixture of kind of expert people who are much more expert than me, dietitians, nutritionists, and so on, but also things like schools that are doing a brilliant thing growing vegetables, or I've got a friend who does online cookery classes for families, and she like helps the parents and the children to cook together online.
They used to do that at the children's centre near us when we were in Yorkshire. Brilliant.
They're really fun. So she's got loads of tips. She's seen loads of parents with children. She's got loads of tips about like how to make it easier to bake with children. So it'll just be things like that, like lots of little snippets, so that like if there's a bit that doesn't apply to you because your children aren't the right age, or you don't eat that way, you can just like forward to the next bit and watch the next bit. So that'll be called the Food for Kids podcast, and it's coming out towards the end of August.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joanne, for coming on. And like I said to you, everybody watching or listening to this, all of these links are going to be in the show notes. So, you know, and you just click through and then you'll find Joanne. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's
It's
been
been
really
lovely.
useful. I'm going to go and find some blindfolds now and get chocolate.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.